Hello, everybody. I hope you're having a good day. We are really lucky to have one of my favorite guests back with us. Criminal defense attorney Andrea Burkhart is here to talk about a range of things. We're going to talk about updates of the Johnny Depp Amber Heard situation. We're going to talk a bit about the Marilyn Manson situation. And also, we're going to get into a discussion, a controversial discussion for a number of you about the royal family and Harry and Meghan's Oprah interview. So, Andrea, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Always good to be here.
Well, I wanted to talk more about updates in the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard case for a number of our viewers. And one of the things that I saw people bringing up on Twitter is Elon Musk's recent appearance on Saturday Night Live. And of course, as our viewers, a lot of our Johnny Depp viewers know, and some of the rest of you may know, Elon Musk has been dodging a subpoena from Johnny Depp for how long? A long time.
I mean, over a year.
And so anyway, some people were joking around on Twitter, but also being serious in a way about like, well, why can't he be subpoenaed at SNL, right? If they know he's going to be on Saturday Night Live, why can't Johnny Depp's lawyer or representative or whomever be there to drop the subpoena on him? So can you answer that question and give us your insights on some of this?
Yeah. Well, so the issue with the subpoena comes down to the problem of the case being in state court. Civics 101, we have a federalist society, 50 states with their independent governments, including their own court systems, and then the unified federal system that, is nationwide. And under our system, the federal government is limited, right? And so you don't really have a whole lot of you don't have federal murder, for example. You don't have federal rape. There's a lot of crimes and things like that. They happen locally. The federal government is interested in stuff that happens interstate for the most part, or otherwise have national implications. So this case is taking place in state court, and that means that the jurisdiction of the Virginia court ends at Virginia's borders. So if you have a Virginia subpoena, the authority of the court to be able to enforce that subpoena is limited to the borders of the state. So historically, what that would mean is that, you're in a lawsuit with somebody in Virginia and they, go across the river to, what's across the river from Virginia? Maryland? Yeah. I think Maryland's across the river.
Yeah.
So I hate me East Coast people. So you just escape the jurisdiction of the court, and there's really nothing that can be done. That person would have to, pursue you into the next state and then get the court in that next state, to do something about whatever your complaint is, or to hand them back over to Virginia. So believe it or not, the system that we have now is actually much more streamlined and much more effective than it used to be. What you have to do now is you would go to the court in Maryland, and there's basically a uniform process that a number of states have adopted. And it says basically, look, as long as your court in your state of Virginia has authorized this subpoena, then we'll accept that as, we'll kind of give full faith and credit to that process. We'll accept that as a valid court order, and we'll go ahead and rely on that to issue our own subpoena that you can then serve in our state. So that's what's been going on with the California process, is that the Virginia court says, yes, I'm authorizing these foreign subpoenas to be issued. They're going down to the California court, and basically then they can serve the subpoena in California, and the California court will then be responsible for any type of contempt or failure to comply with that subpoena, the arguments about the scope of the subpoena, and so forth. So I don't know offhand if New York is part of one of these, uniform jurisdictions that will allow that kind of service to take place. I assume that they are, but I don't know. But that's ultimately the complication, is because it's an interstate process, you have to get permission from Virginia. You have to follow whatever process is required in New York. You have to, I mean, then have all your same ordinary problems that we've been having for 18 months anyway, of how do you get close enough to Elon Musk, you know, to get the subpoena into his hand. He's presumably got, you know, a lot of beefy guys who he can put between you and him to make that not happen. So, you know, that's sort of the long and short of what some of the technical problems are with trying to get him served in an interstate action.
Do you have any sense, thank you, do you have any sense of why the subpoena process is so difficult? It seems like it's not it shouldn't be this thing where like a person has to like physically track down another person. Is there a reason? It should be something where they just send you a text and it's like, okay, you're served. Or I guess I just don't understand how people can dodge subpoenas for, but anyway.
Yeah, no, I understand that. And there is, you know, it is, the subpoena is an extremely old document. You know, it's one, I think may go back to Rome. I'm not even sure. So it's a very archaic and very formalized process. And I think that's a big part of the answer to your question, you know, because it's a formal court order and you don't comply with it, you can go to jail, you know, so there's a lot of formalities associated with it to make sure that, you know, one, the order itself is legitimate, it's being issued for good cause, you know, we're not putting somebody in peril of jail or whatever, you know, when maybe they're not even going to have anything to say about the case, that type of thing. We need to make sure that they have notice. We need to make sure that they have an opportunity to object. If they are, you know, people, yeah, there are lawyers that will harass people with subpoenas and stuff. And that's, you know, inappropriate. And there needs to be mechanisms for people to be able to challenge that. So that's kind of the you know, justification, I guess, for why we still use this rather archaic process. You know, there has been a little bit of movement. The law's a dinosaur, you know, it doesn't, especially legal procedure, it doesn't evolve very quickly or very effectively. There has been some developments, I want to say maybe over the last 10 years of like these tiny incremental steps towards maybe we can do electronic service, you know, so we might get there, but it'll probably take like 20 years. And then by then we won't even like be doing digital things anymore. You know, it'll be something else.
That's funny. I can totally see that. Well, so is there anything else that's been going on with Johnny Depp and Amber Heard lately that you're interested in discussing? I know that there's been a lot of chatter online about speculation about if any of her friends who testified for her or supported her in depositions, if any of them, you know, might flip or not, and also people commenting about how she seems to be just posting all of this carefree, you know, stuff on Instagram and photos and getting ready for Aquaman 2 and everything. And when the walls and legally and seem to be kind of closing in on her. So I just kind of am curious, like, where do you see things generally right now for the players involved, or do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, so there's a lot of stuff, you know, going on right now. For all that it looks like it's a quiet time. We're still a year away from trial. We're still in discovery. So there's still a lot going on behind the scenes that we don't know. But what we have seen is we've seen that Amber Heard has filed another motion to dismiss. And I did a big, long Twitter thread about that. It's super boring and technical, but if that's your thing, feel free to check it out. I'm at A Burkhart Law. And so I did a legal analysis and some research into her plea and bar. And, you know, my conclusion is that she has zero chance. It's, you know, barely on this side of being frivolous. So that's happened, but the hearing on that isn't going to be for, I think, June the 6th, I believe is when that's set. That's also going to be the first dispositive hearing that we have with the new judge. Back a couple months ago now, Judge White, who's been on the case since the inception, he retired. So we have a new judge. I'm not going to try to say her name because at some point somebody will say it for us and then we'll say it the way they say it. But Judge Penny A, I'll just call her Judge Penny A, is coming on board. And so this is something that, there's a lot of discomfort about, and understandably, because, we've had one judge for a long time. He's gotten familiar with the case. We kind of have a sense of who he is and how he rules, and the types of things that he says, and so forth. So for that to switch, to somebody completely different at this stage is a bit disconcerting. But so she's given us some preliminary rulings so far on discovery issues, fairly small things. She has said that Amber Heard has had to produce, more of the things that Johnny Depp wants her to produce. There was a dispute about legal fees that she was ordered to pay. Judge Penny A basically imposed the full amount of the legal fees that Johnny had requested. So far she seems to be, pretty fair, not really being kind of pushed over really by either side.
Judge. Yeah.
As far as we've seen. But so this is going to be a big, a big moment. And I for one hope we get the transcript of the hearing, because I really want to see, how does she engage with the lawyers? How does she engage with the parties? I spend my career talking to judges and trying to answer their questions and trying to understand how they're thinking based on the types of things they're asking me, the types of things that they're asking the other side. So I'm really eager to see the types of questions that Judge Penny A has for the parties.
Yeah, it'll be definitely very interesting. I'm curious how much, and I know that you're not a celebrity attorney, but I'm curious how much money you think that both sides, Amber Heard and Johnny Depp, have spent so far on lawyers. If you had to just ballpark it, I just think it would have to be so much.
Well, I look at their fee affidavits and I'm seeing like $900 an hour. I'm like, holy cow, like that ain't my neighborhood, so they're already, making so much more money than I can even really imagine. This has been going on since roughly 2018.
This particular lawsuit,
particular lawsuit. That's the thing. Their whole legal dispute has gone back. Yeah, it's 5 years old now. So if I were going to try to break that down, are
we into the millions? You would say
easily we could be into the millions. I don't think that's hard at all. The question is really how many, two, three. Doesn't seem unreasonable to me at all. And that just depends also on what's going on, again, behind the scenes. We knew before the UK trial that she'd hired some computer forensic person to analyze the bots, to get the bot report about all the bot accounts that, that Adam Waldman bought from Russia or something. So that's an expert that she's paid for. No idea, what that kind of thing is going to cost, but you can spend a lot of money just on getting expert reports for various types of things. And that's the sort of thing that we're not seeing yet. We won't really see that until trial. There could be medical experts. There could be psychological experts. There could be domestic violence experts. There could be the people that do image analysis, all the computer forensics. There's just a ton of stuff that experts could be brought in for on the case. And that could cost another 1 or 2 million.
Okay. So given how much money you think that it probably is costing, and on Amber's side in particular, because we know that her net worth, much less than Johnny Depp's, and her, at least, I think so from what I've read, even with the financial problems that he's had. And so I guess my question to you is since this has been going on for so long, and she's on the other side of the ocean too. There's that whole thing in the UK as well, but this whole situation has been going on for so long. Is it is it conceivable that she could be paying for all of this out of her pocket, or is the idea that Elon Musk is bankrolling this, is that kind of obvious? Or
I think it's a completely legitimate question to ask. I don't think we know enough at this point. I don't think it's probably reached the point where there's no credible way that with $7 million she could have paid for everything. Right now, the issue is that we obviously know she's done other things with the 7 million also.
And just for our viewers who don't know, the 7 million is what she got in her divorce settlement. So basically, like that's her assumed net worth after she and Depp split. So anyway, go ahead.
Sure. And I mean, you know, in fairness to her, she did have a career such as it was.
Right.
You know, she made some of her own money, and so, you know, she has more resources, you know, than the average person. She's top, you know, 0.5% or whatever in net worth in the world. So it's not inconceivable that she's paying all, you know, for everything herself. The thing to me that is interesting about Elon, and just the possibility that that's going on is that, well, I don't know. There's just, it's hard to piece together the story, you know, and kind of this theory of Elon and Amber and where it fits, because they definitely don't seem to still, you know, be close in any sort of meaningful way, right? And so
there was that kind of conspiracy theory. Well, I don't want to be dismissive like that for people who believe this, but there was a photo, you probably saw this, there was a photo in the fall that came out in the fall in like a Spanish magazine, I think, or tabloid, and it had the two of them supposedly, you know, you could see them having dinner, but supposedly it was in Mexico and it was taken in the fall and stuff after her UK verdict. But that was never, and people can correct me in the comments if I'm wrong about that, but I think that was never like verified or anything. So for all intents and purposes, like what you're saying, that's right.
Well, I mean, what we do know, he's got a, you know, child with a new woman.
Right.
There's no sort of public interaction, you know, between them. So as far as what they want the world to see, there's no relationship there.
Right.
And so, yeah, it does kind of raise the question of, well, is there something behind the scenes? And I just don't know if we know. There's been so many sort of strange little bits and pieces that have come out. One of the problems that's gonna happen with the trial is because some of that information came from Amber's mother, and Amber's mother has since passed away. So that, you know, she's dead. She can't testify. She can't be called to testify. And anything that she told other people was hearsay. But it was a conversation between Amber's mother and Jennifer Howell that has kind of, I think, gotten a little bit of the wheels turning about, you know, what might be going on, what might explain, you know, Elon continuing to be involved when publicly, at least, they have completely split off from each other. And so Jennifer Howell is the one who had talked about supposedly Amber had told her mother that Elon had, you know, given her a Tesla, but he had bugged it, so she had given it back, and then there was some, you know, legal dispute over frozen embryos. So I mean, I guess that could be a motivation. I don't really see what the, you know, embarrassment or illegality, whatever, what do you need to cover that up for? I don't know. I just feel like there is a lot there that we don't know. And so, you know, I'm hesitant to kind of try to explain it as anything.
Right. Absolutely. And, you know, a friend of mine has what I think is an interesting theory, but just to be clear to the audience, this is not, you know, an objective analysis I'm giving you here. This is just someone's theory that I thought was interesting, is that it could have played out if Elon were behind this, or is still basically funding these legal maneuvers and stuff. It could be that way back when we know that he and Amber did have a sexual relationship, that at that time, he was being very chivalrous and was like, okay, don't worry, I'll take care of it. And she was probably, crying and very upset. And, oh my God, Johnny's doing all of this to me, and he's lawyers, whatever. And that maybe what we're seeing now is a kind of just continuing of the bureaucratic wheels of, like, basically that Elon sort of turned this over to a legal team or someone at some point, and it's just like, yeah, keep it going, right? And that, so he may not even be like actively, like, emotionally or personally involved in this, but it's basically like something that he could have gotten started, for Amber, when then he's just letting it go because he's worth so much money. It doesn't matter anyway. I know. I mean, theory, but I thought.
Well, and the other piece of it too is there does seem to be some kind of weird triangle between Elon and Amber and the ACLU. And I'll tell you, the thing that has come out that for me is really the most kind of hair raising, and it sounds ridiculous because only a lawyer would be like, the horror. But it was the email that came out, the email exchange between Anthony Romero, who's the chief executive of the ACLU, and these email conversations with Amber, referring to the donation. And so basically what had happened is that ACLU had received a $250,000 check from Vanguard. Vanguard is a nationwide investment company. Lots of people use it. It's a way that you can self-direct a lot of what you do with your finances rather than, having a manager do that for you. So Vanguard has a charitable component where, basically people can create special kinds of accounts. You're enormously wealthy. You want to take a tax write-off. So I'm going to take $1 million of my wealth this year, put it into the special account. Then I can use that account to make charitable contributions. So there's a lot of real specific rules about how this works because it's tax preferred and you get these benefits from it. And so very crystal clear that anytime you're dealing with something with a nonprofit, there can't be what's called private inurement or private benefit. Like you have to be supporting basically the mission of the nonprofit organization. The nonprofit organization, can't be like, wink, wink, we're giving you kickbacks or whatever, like that type of thing is not okay. And so for this email to come out where, Amber Heard is now getting credit towards her pledge for this donation, that Elon Musk had made through this Vanguard account, which is not supposed to be, for any individual's benefit. It's not supposed to count, towards somebody else's pledge. This is serious. Like you're breaking some major tax rules here on the part of the ACLU. So, it's the type of thing that they're an IRS, agent or investigator or whatever who wanted to look into that. That's a violation, crystal clear. And there's all kinds of specific penalties that are set out for that type of a thing. So that was really embarrassing to the ACLU, from my standpoint. I don't know that that's really widely shared because it is such a sort of technical,
no, that's fascinating
type of thing. But so the fact that the ACLU will bend the rules, on behalf of this particular, large donor Elon and this particular, whoever ambassador person that they're sort of using, Amber. I think I don't think ACLU comes out of this looking all that principled.
And so basically that's really, it's fascinating. And the tax stuff, I haven't heard anyone talk about that. So that's really interesting. And so basically the idea here is that, again, for people who may not be following so closely, is that the ACLU basically colluded with Amber and Elon to make it look like she was donating this money. Is that the main accusation? Or is that the main issue, or there's
that's the main issue. So this all came out when it was coming to light that, after all these years of, I donated the 7 million to the Children's Hospital of LA and the ACLU, that in fact Amber Heard had not donated anything. That as far as we know, the only money that ever got donated in her name was done by Johnny Depp at the, beginning of the divorce. And she then threw a massive fit over him doing that so that he would have to pay the rest to her personally. So after the UK trial, then Johnny's lawyers were, they're continuing to do discovery in preparation for the Virginia trial. And a lot of this they couldn't do for the UK because Amber Heard was a witness. She wasn't a party. So they had very limited ability to be able to investigate and challenge, what she had to say. And that was, one of the things that came out in the appeal process that people were very upset with. So anyway, shortly after the UK trial, they end up, getting this discovery from the ACLU and from the Children's Hospital that, basically confirmed, she hasn't paid anything. And so it was in the course of that this correspondence with the ACLU got produced, and that then, brought to light that, they're trying to credit her for making this donation that she didn't make, that Elon made, and that, they shouldn't have ever been trying to credit her for anyway. And she's trying to take credit for it by, suggesting she's been responsible for X number, of dollars in donations. So I don't know, just a particularly,
well, and what's sorry, go ahead, finish.
Oh no, I couldn't come up with the word. Just unseemly, just a very unseemly type of situation to come to light, which kind of seems to be now par for the course with Amber.
Yeah, I was just it's very crazy. There's just so many twists and turns with this case, and to think about the people and the organizations that she's gotten to go along with this, it's very interesting, and it's really interesting to see like how many people and organizations, and seemingly good people and good organizations at times, whether it's some of her friends and or like ACLU or whatever, that Amber has gotten to go along with these different charades. And I think it's kind of interesting, to think about this idea of like of narcissism and how she seems to be able to pull people into this alternate reality that she creates. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that? I know we talked about it a little earlier.
Yeah, well, so obviously there's a lot of opinions and kind of conversation out there about narcissism and is Amber Heard a narcissist and that type of thing. And according to Johnny Depp, yes, she is. According to him, she has that formal diagnosis, among others. Maybe we'll find out for sure in Virginia. But so it's definitely helpful, I think, to look at it through that lens and then evaluate, well, is that lens, is the picture that you get looking through that lens consistent with what we actually see in the world? That is, not proof that that's the case, but it certainly, gives it some weight. So the thing that I am kind of interested in with Amber Heard, so first off, just by way of background, my personal background, I'm very fortunate. I don't really have, narcissists or really pathological people in my family at all. But I definitely work with them. I work with a lot of really, really difficult people. And so one of the things that when you talk about narcissism, there's a lot of different styles, it's like there's a lot of ways that this can manifest. And we can talk about, sort of broad categories of behaviors and just ways of thinking and ways of engaging with the world and motivations and things like that. But it ultimately comes down to, very deeply self-centered person and self-referential person that just is not able to really relate to other people in a empathic and understanding kind of way. So what I see with Amber that really jumped out at me over like the last week is when it came out. There have been some new documents that have been kind of trickled out, leaked out into the media. And they appear to be depositions that involve potentially Amber's former lawyer, Eric George, who she subpoenaed for some reason that, nobody can quite figure out or knows at this point. And then subpoena possibly also deposition with some of the folks from the ACLU, as we've been learning more about how the op-ed came to be written in the first place. And so there was an email exchange that was discussed in one of these little deposition snippets that's been leaked. And it's a comment from Amber where she's clearly gotten feedback on her draft about the op-ed. And she's basically saying, thank you for the feedback. And understand what you're saying about not mentioning the marriage. So what if we just instead say, well, back when I successfully got a restraining order, or back when a court, validated my position, something along those lines. And what struck me about it is how she seems to be one of these people that will just wear you down. And I think that's kind of what Johnny Depp described, right? Is that you can only hang on to reality for so long, before the easiest thing to do to get goddamn peace is to just say, fine, whatever you say, that's how it is, do it your way.
Right.
And so that's really what jumped out to me in that email. And I had a moment of like, God, I feel for these poor lawyers, because I know exactly what it's like to try to manage these people who know everything and they have it in their head, and they are not going to, incorporate any part of your reality whatsoever into their world.
Wow. Yeah, that is quite a statement on the situation, and I think very accurate of what it must be like to be Amber Heard's counsel. And by the way, let me ask you, while it pops into my mind, Amber Heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, but Amber Heard used to be, a couple of years ago or whatever, she was represented by Roberta Kaplan, Bobby Kaplan, who's a member of Time's Up, right? Or like a really.
I think so. I can't keep track of the organizations. I forget which one is which. But Time's Up is the one that, as far as I remember, is associated with the CAA, which basically the agents, the talent and the agents in Los Angeles. And so I remember Rose McGowan, for example, was like really critical of Time's Up, because she's like, yeah, that's the foxes guarding the hen house, right? That the idea being that it was this big money, organization that would be able to, put on this show of we're doing something and raising lots of money we're doing something, but the people that are involved are like literally the people that you should be taking actions against.
I see what you're saying. Well, and so Roberta Kaplan, I was just looking it up. She co-founded Time's Up, attorney, and anyway, what I was wanting to ask you is, as you know, at a certain point, Time's Up and Ms. Kaplan ended up dropping Amber Heard as a client. Now they released a statement saying that it was due to locational reason. It didn't really make sense. Yeah.
And record low gas prices, but there was a problem.
So I guess my question to you is, I know what they said, that when she says, I still support Amber. I know she even will defend her on Twitter sometimes now, but was cutting Amber loose like that, was that basically more or less an admission that Amber's story was full of shit and that it was damaging them?
I mean, I don't know if it was the Amber story was full of shit. What I saw that was going on in this time frame, that I sort of inferred like this could have something to do with Bobby Kaplan dropping out, was this was about the time that the bot report came out, right? And Amber, clearly, judging by her counterclaim, is like obsessed with Twitter and what people say about her on social media. And so she was bound and determined to push this theory. She has it in her mind that, Johnny Depp and or Adam Waldman are, somehow colluding with Russia to, harass her on Twitter or something. And so the problem was she got this report and they tried to spin it as best as they could of like, yeah, we found, I think it was 7 problematic accounts, out of, obviously thousands of people that talk about Amber Heard and Johnny Depp on a day-to-day basis.
Right. So she was looking, again, for some viewers who might not know, she was trying to, Amber's was trying to present this case that there are all these pro-Johnny bots out there and supporters, but pro-Johnny bots that are just abusing her online and flooding her, her with all this abuse. And that was basically it, right? Like she was trying to make that link or say that.
She tried to make that case. And so the problem is that, judging by this report, there's really no factual basis for it at all. And so when you're a lawyer, you don't really get to just make accusations because somebody wants to. You have to have a good faith basis to bring your claim to the court. So if you are not going to be able to prove that there is a bot army conspiracy that is being, manufactured and overseen by Johnny Depp and Adam Waldman, then you don't file that fucking counterclaim, okay? Because that's some serious ethical lines that you're crossing. So that's kind of what I saw timing wise about why Robbie Kaplan might have backed out then, because, hey, we tried, we got this report, but she's not gonna go pursue this counterclaim, at the risk of her own reputation. And so then that, was when Amber Heard switched, and now she's found Elaine, Mountain Dew, as she gets called. And, Mountain Dew either didn't get the report or didn't have the ethical compulsions. That part of her counterclaim ended up being thrown out for legal reasons. So, it never even got to the point of investigating it. Like, it was literally that frivolous that the facts don't even matter. Like, you don't even have a legal argument to work with. Mm-hmm. But that's been part of the context of the change of counsel, and you can infer from that what you may, but certainly I have my own opinions about it.
Thinking about the case with Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, and also thinking about the Manson case. I've heard some people say that there's almost a cottage industry in terms of I guess lawyers and activists and so forth that get involved in these types of cases. And I'm just curious, is that a statement that you agree with? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, 100%. Famous people must deal with so many nuisance claims. It's just one of the, downsides of fame that I don't think most of us really see or appreciate. Yeah, absolutely. The nuisance lawsuit is 100% a thing. And, there are people that specialize in, I don't want to say fabricating them, because they're usually not fabricated. They're just extraordinarily, nitpicked or whatever.
Distorted.
Distorted. And obviously when we're getting into a situation like Amber Heard or like Manson's case, you're talking about people making specific, accusations of wrongdoing. So this is more of a, they're fabricating type of situation. Which is not to say that people won't do that in nuisance cases. But a lot of times, the nuisance case can just be for things like, the I was trying to get a picture and the bodyguard pushed me, and I fell and bruised and so now I needed $800,000 worth of surgery and my life is ruined. It happens. It's definitely just part of the cost of the system that we have.
I guess one question, if you had any thoughts on the Manson case.
No, I think what stands out to me is it's really following the whole where there's smoke, there's fire approach. And that's such a tough one, because it's one of these things that people, I guess, think is intuitive, and it probably sort of is. But it's obviously really super dangerous. And so we deal with that in legal situations all the time.
Is it possible, or do you think that you could have this many accusers and it turn out that there's nothing to the accusations? Because I do understand, the feeling that people have when they say, look, we've got like all of these different women who've come forward. Have you heard of or seen cases before where you had a number of accusers? Do you think the media is related to this?
I think the complicated thing in Marilyn Manson's case is because he's famous. So there's just the whole other set of incentives going on. One of the things that I see, and I think you might have even mentioned it in one of your shows at one point, is that when something really dramatic or really high profile happens, like in my case, if there's a murder in a small town, everybody suddenly knows that person. Everybody was just there right before it happened. Everybody kind of wants to be in this kind of morbid sort of way. They want to be connected with it. And I feel like that plays out a lot in a situation like Marilyn Manson's, where you have this very famous man. You have these people who have, these just various types of fan interactions with him and stuff. And I mean, I'm like you, I'm not part of the scene, so to speak. I don't really know the community, but I'm certainly aware, that it exists, and that, there are people that like to do things with their sex lives, a little differently than I do. And so, I just think it's almost kind of normal and predictable that when you have somebody who has, been promiscuous, been around the block,
yeah.
He's made a lot of those connections, and then suddenly there's this high drama association that with him that's getting all this attention. I think it's perfectly normal that a lot of people want to climb on board that train.
Well, and that's something, that I talked about the Marilyn Manson situation, the idea that someone also because someone is a rock star and is older, right? There's this whole idea now that you hear brought up a lot of grooming, but grooming adults. It used to be the idea, the commonly accepted idea was that you could only groom people who were underage, because the whole idea of grooming is like, and you can probably give me a more technical term, but that the predator is basically like psychologically preparing this underage person to enter into a sexual relationship or to be assaulted or whatever. But now, in these I see over and over in these conversations about Marilyn Manson, the idea that because when he was in his 30s or or early 40s or whatever, and he was having relationships with women in their very late teens, or for the most part women in their 20s, that this was a kind of a grooming. I really have a problem with the use of that term. And so I guess what I'm saying is, when we talk about how the media depicts this idea of certain people in privileged situations that we can't empathize with, it seems that that's even now starting to apply to the idea of age. At least if the man is older, then he's automatically assumed to be in this privileged position, and also to be, able to overpower intellectually, psychologically overpower, fully adult women.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and of course we don't say that about, old women who get their younger boyfriends. We don't look at Madonna's boyfriend as being, some victim. The problem is that building comfort with people is normal human activity, and so it's really only grooming when you're casting it as it's abuse. It's preparatory for abuse. So it's kind of circular in that sense. It's only grooming if you've been abused, but you're saying you've been abused because you've been groomed. That's hard for me to kind of follow that. But I definitely, see what you're saying as far as the kind of power dynamic that's now being pitched with the age. And it's, that as well. It's one of those things that is, it's really frustrating to me, having been a 20-year-old woman,
And well, especially when we're not even talking about, in these situations, 14, 15-year-olds, we're talking about the idea that that a 37-year-old man having a relationship with a woman who's 18 or 19, a very sophisticated worldly woman, that there's somehow something wrong going on there.
Well, and and part of that, I think, is just a problem. We have so many problems with agency, with female agency, that have been, playing out for so long. And to me, I'm a big Camille Paglia fan, and, have been since I first came across her in the 90s. And so I feel like there was kind of this, feminist divide in the 90s. And I feel like Camille Paglia lost. And that's a big reason of why we are the way we are, because she put an enormous amount of emphasis on not just female agency, but female power, and, the different ways that women have, to exercise power different from men. We are not going to overpower the men. I've been in the boxing ring with them. Ain't gonna happen. So
that sounds like a great story to tell in a future video.
You ever want to do that? Gender in sports, I'm your girl. Listen to Claressa Shields. Actually, Claressa Shields is one of the top women's middleweight boxers right now. She's an amazing woman. Terrible, grew up with a really hard life in Flint, Michigan. Made the U.S. Olympic team in boxing in 2012, 2016. I forget. But anyway, so she's a 2-time Olympic gold medalist, and like by far one of the baddest ass women on the entire planet. And she talks a lot about being a woman and being in that kind of sport and what that means and how different it is, relative to a man. Anyway, that was a total aside.
No, that's interesting.
But one of the things that Camille Paglia said that she takes so much heat for, in my opinion, by people who just deliberately want to misconstrue her, is she used the analogy of, she compared being a young college woman going to a frat party and getting roaring drunk. She compared that to driving into, some, urban center in a Rolls Royce, and parking it and leaving the doors unlocked and the key in the ignition. And the whole point of this analogy is not to assign blame and to say that, you're at fault for doing this. The point is to say, what do you expect is going to happen? Like, there is a reality out there that you need to be prepared to be able to deal with, because if you are so naive, that you don't realize that there are predators out there that will, do whatever they're going to do at the frat party, or, take your car and do whatever with it, then you're going to have a hard time in life. And so it's not doing women a disservice. It's not doing women any favors to not prepare them to have to enforce their boundaries and, and take responsibility for their safety and their well-being. Again, I'm not blaming anybody, for being raped or being a victim or anything along those lines. It is always 100% the rapist's fault. I say that because we're talking about female agency. And so in like the context of Marilyn Manson, we're using this idea of grooming. If we had women with a strong sense of their own agency and their own power and their own need to police their boundaries and the righteousness of policing their own boundaries, it's really hard to groom that woman, because as soon as you cross the line that she's not comfortable with, she's going to call you out on that.
Yeah. And by the way, we're not saying that it's all on the woman either to enforce her boundaries. The man in a relationship, he's enforcing his boundaries too. We don't tend to think of men stereotypically as enforcing sexual boundaries, but I know plenty of situations where that's happened, and also, enforcing other kinds of boundaries. No, I don't want to see you tonight. No, I don't want to go out with you, or whatever. So, two adults and are in charge of their behavior. Now, if one of them physically overpowers the other, or by threat of violence or whatever, then that's unacceptable. But the thing is, and I know to some degree, you've seen some of my stuff on this, maybe not a lot, but with the Marilyn Manson thing, is that you have a number of the accusers, some of the main accusers on record is saying, I never told him no. In fact, in some of the cases, they say I was enthusiastic. I was enthusiastic, not all of them, but a number of the cases, like as maybe Bianco. Well, I actually sent him a text saying that I liked it, or it hurt so good, or whatever. And no, I didn't tell him no, or whatever. Well, that's what we're talking about, is the complete, just rejection of agency. Like I just had to let it happen.
And even to the point of, I forget which one, but I'm pretty sure one of them said, I didn't realize at the time. It wasn't until later that I figured out, that this was abusive and stuff.
Several of them said that, yes.
I'm not going to say that doesn't happen or that can't happen, but it's a red flag. If your reality is so malleable that something, you were okay with this long, at the time that it happened, and now time has elapsed and now you're not okay with it. It's fine to evolve and grow as a human and to, recognize that, like, gosh, I have boundaries now, maybe I didn't have then, or I'm better at, enforcing my boundaries compared to how I was when I was younger. I think, a lot of women go through that experience of figuring that out as we get older.
Right.
But it's just to then sort of fault the man for your having had this, inconsistent worldview is just, it's not fair, obviously. But it is also just not feminist, it kind of, it's just harkens back to all these things about how, women are so incomprehensible and, never know what they're thinking and just
and delicate and have no sense of agency
and hysterical and all that
right.
stuff, just, emotional and hormonal. I mean, whatever, all of it.
Right.
It just really plays into that if we're going to divorce our sense of justice and fairness from objective reality and, be grounding it in these subjective ideas of how I feel right now.
Right.
It's very troubling.
And sort of retroactively, like, I feel this way, so therefore he should have known that, or
yeah. So we have in the U.S. Constitution the prohibition against ex post facto laws, and what that means is that you can't make law that criminalizes something that happened in the past. And it has to do with just basic ideas of fairness and notice. You deserve to be on notice if what you are going to, if what you're going to do is going to be treated as criminal. And it's just such a basic but important principle that for whatever reason, we're not buying into that in this context of these, later accusations of sexual assault. These are ex post facto accusations. Literally, they were fine at the time. Now they're not.
Right. Wow. That's really interesting stuff. Thinking about this defamation trial coming up, and this lawsuit, Johnny Depp's lawsuit against Amber Heard. What do you see? I don't want us to, on the one hand, I don't want us to help Amber Heard with a legal defense here, but what do you see as a lawyer as being like the strongest component of her case? What is one strength, if there's even a strength, but what, if you were an attorney, what would you see as like a big asset for her side or her story or whatever? Is there anything that, and I can edit out any pauses if you need to think about it. I just something came to mind.
Yeah. I mean,
or maybe a better way of putting it is if you were, and I know you've talked about this a bit before, but if you, let's say that Amber Heard hired you tonight, where do you go from here? What is your priority with her? What are you advising her? Are you advising her to get the hell out of this situation?
Everybody is advising her to settle, right? Everybody is advising her to settle. The problem is that
but Johnny doesn't want to, right?
I am confident that Johnny Depp would not settle at this point for anything less than a complete retraction, apology, acknowledgement that it was, not true and that he never beat her. And she's never going to do that. And he may not even settle for that because we've already seen from the NDA that she just does not, her word isn't, you can't rely on her. She's not a person of integrity. So there would be no, real way to guarantee that she wouldn't, just say, yeah, I retracted because I had to, because, me and old Johnny Depp made me. I was out of money. They were bullying. I mean, just whatever, pathetic excuse she would come up with. So he doesn't have a good incentive to settle. But she is just digging herself a deeper and deeper hole. And that's, again, it's sort of hard to say at this point because discovery is private. So it doesn't, unless, it's being brought into court to support some type of motion that's being made, or unless it's something that's specifically released to the media, it's not part of the confidential, discovery process, then we don't know about it. So there's a ton that's going on that we don't know and we don't see. She could be having, she could be making all kinds of hay that we don't know about right now, because she's been able to find like little discrepancies between, Kevin Murphy said this on this time, but then, Jerry Judge said this another time. And so maybe those are in conflict and, we can use that to undermine Johnny's story. But I think honestly, the biggest I mean, this is sort of trite to say, Amber's biggest problem is Amber, and the counterclaim, just the counterclaim was such an enormous strategic error
that her side filed.
Yes.
Counterclaim.
Yes. So she, she basically said, not, I didn't, you did. And, which is just, it's sort of funny, if it weren't so serious, just the projection that you see, over and over and over again with Amber. So she filed, her counterclaim against Johnny, no, I didn't defame you, you defamed me. And, oh, you're worth 50,000, I'm worth 50 million, I'm worth 150 million, It was such a strategic error because it has so clearly now framed the case in terms of, great, so which one of you is lying and which one of you is telling the truth? And there isn't as easy a way for the jury to be able to, just looking at Johnny Depp's claim, be able to be like, well, I'm not sure we have actual malice. Well, I'm not sure we have, damage, significant damage to his reputation. There are specific elements that have to be proven, to establish a claim for defamation. And so conventionally, what a lawyer will do, step number one is you do what you can to undermine that person's claim against you before you worry about, now I will put on an affirmative case to show you, my side and why I'm correct. So she has essentially forfeited that whole kind of part of the field, because there isn't going to be any way that the jury can resolve the legal claims in the case without deciding, I believe you or I believe you. So I feel like that's really, from a trial standpoint, it's really playing to Johnny's case. And, the problem for her is that once the jury decides, as I feel pretty confident based on what we know at this point, they're going to decide, that she's lying about most, if not all of this, there's really nowhere else for them to go with that. The hardest thing to prove in a defamation case in the United States is actual malice. And so what that is when you sue a public figure, okay, public figures have different standards than everybody else in the US for defamation purposes. Because of the First Amendment, we get to speak freely, we get to say our opinions, we get to debate in the public square. And if that offends people, tough fucking luck. You're in America, put on your big boy pants, deal with it. So we have a lot of leeway to criticize our public figures, our public officials, to have strong opinions, to talk about what they're doing and what we think about what they're doing. And that is all highly protected. So the actual malice standard that has to be met to prove a defamation claim against a public figure means you have to show that that person either actually literally knew that what they were saying was not true, or they were so reckless about whether it was true or not that they just completely disregarded the rights of the person, that they were talking about. So it's this very, very strict standard. It makes it almost impossible to sue like a journalist, even a tabloid journalist, because they're like, oh, well, I heard it from, Bob over in accounting. And so, that's going to be enough to get past this hurdle of, well, I didn't make it up. Somebody said it. Okay, maybe it wasn't super reasonable for me to believe that, but that's just negligent. That's not me being like super reckless and malicious. Amber Heard doesn't have that, she doesn't have that. She's set up to where you're lying. That's literally what the standard is, to be able to for somebody like Johnny Depp to be able to say you have no First Amendment right to say these things. And so without that, her best bet at this point is that the jury's like, well, maybe his career wasn't hurt that bad.
Wow, interesting. And I think that's really fascinating what you were saying about the counterclaim, that by countersuing him as she did in such an audacious way, and claiming that she had lost out on $100 million of revenue that she would have otherwise been, or salary that she would have otherwise been making. Anyway, the point is, by countersuing, she's basically upped the ante on the situation, so that it sounds like this could really backfire on her much more than it.
Well, I think we will already see it backfiring just in the discovery, right? Because it now has expanded the scope of what is relevant in this case. Now her earnings are relevant. Her career is relevant. Her reputation before, Johnny Depp wrote this GQ article or gave this interview, those things are all relevant now, right? Because Johnny Depp can defend the case by saying, even if I did defame her, she already had a terrible reputation, like nothing I did made it any worse for her. So not that I think he's going to need to do that, because he's going to be able to say, obviously, she's lying. But so just in terms of her sphere of privacy and what she would have been able to keep to herself, in all likelihood, had this just been about Johnny's claim, she sacrificed that. She just ceded the field to be able to now have to have all this information and stuff about her disclosed. I've said before that Amber, the strongest evidence to me of Amber Heard being, if not a narcissist, at least something rather disturbed, is how she seems to have just no ability to think strategically and to have a kind of long-term understanding and foresight of like, when you do X, then Y happens, and this idea of like consequences following, from decisions.
Right.
She just seems to be so impulsive that she does, what is going to make her feel okay in the situation. And, when it all comes crashing down later because it was such a terrible decision, presumably she'll do something impulsive then, to make herself feel better at that point. And that's life as Amber Heard.
Oh my goodness. What a horror story. What a shit show.
Well, and one of the things that you said very early on in one of your earliest videos, and it's what made me a fan, because it's not a popular opinion and it's one that I share. I have compassion for Amber Heard, because what a shitty life it must be to live like that. Assuming she does have some sort of, pathology like borderline or narcissism, one of these personality disorders, number one, often, not always, and it depends on what you're talking about, but often, those are really bad life situations that lead to that type of personality being developed, right? So you have to have compassion with that. It's
right.
Not an excuse, it's an understanding. But also just to think about how it must be to be so constantly paranoid and so constantly, just anxious and on edge and fragile and needy and all of these things. It sounds to me just extremely emotionally uncomfortable all the time. And so I can understand why, you might drink a lot or you might take a lot of drugs, because it just is not, it's not a good way to live. And that's kind of the karma in the whole situation. Karma is kind of one of these ideas that, it gets used a lot. And I don't know that's like really fully appreciated what it means, but karma really just means consequences. And Amber Heard being Amber Heard is her own karma. Like that's her karma. That's the product of the choices that she's made, is she has to live that life.
Yes, exactly. And I think that that's one of the things that it seems like that made Johnny Depp continue to give her, second chances for so long, is because, one of the things that he said is he always looked at someone like that and said, well, I can fix them.
Mm-hmm.
I can fix my mom, or I can fix Amber. And I think that if we feel that compassion for Amber, even though, we hate what she's doing to Johnny Depp,
Mm-hmm.
I can't imagine being in love with her and having seen the good sides of her character. And I know some of you might be like, there are no good sides, but seriously, and knowing that there really is like just a messed up little child and their little girl, and I do think that, and Jennifer Howells talked about this, about the fact that she and Whitney went through a lot of abuse with dad in that household. But when you look at it is amazing how self-destructive her choices have been. I've talked about this before in my videos, but if she had just been like a halfway non-psychotic wife to Johnny Depp, like if she had just been able to like refrain from, like throwing things at him or punching him or shitting in the bed, if she had done that, like she'd still be married to him, and or if they'd gotten a divorce, she wanted a divorce, like he was going to be good to her, and instead it's all of these unforced errors. It's really astounding to look at her and her history with especially, post split, with all the stunts that she's pulled, and yet she just keeps taking it to the wall. And it's like you said, I guess it's her personality type. She cannot stop. She's just full force with it. And again, like, I can only imagine what Johnny Depp felt loving this woman, and like he said, wanting to fix her, wanting to save her. And we talked about this in other contexts and other conversations that you and I have had. We have some kind of controversial opinions on the royal family, or the Meghan Markle and Harry situation, and the recent Oprah interview. And so we wanted to talk about that a little bit. And talking about this savior complex, or this desire that Johnny Depp had to save Amber. And I wonder if you had any thoughts about how that connects to, or we see a similar dynamic with Harry and Meghan, perhaps.
Well, and that's one of the things that I to me is a big red flag in just a lot of the things that they've said. And just the Oprah interview was a good example, where I think they both at one point or another spoke of the other one being their savior, that Harry had saved Meghan from, this apparently, intolerable work situation for the royals. Not totally clear exactly what Meghan's beef was. And then, Meghan, of course, saved Harry from the burdens of, being royal, and everything that went along with that apparently Harry has been, stoking some resentment for all of his life, by his account. So there's this savior mythology that they've kind of created for each other that, really, to me, it's a red flag anytime, with Johnny. Like, if you had been an outsider, looking in at this relationship, and, seeing basically Amber self-destructing, and, Johnny wanting to save her, you'd be like, Johnny, red flag, warning, like, slow the train here. Maybe give that a second thought. It's just it's not a good sign, I think, of somebody's maturity and somebody's just functionality, as a person. If you're dependent on others to save you, because you haven't learned to save yourself, or you can't be bothered, to save yourself, you don't care about saving yourself, whatever that situation is, like, that's a sign of a troubled person. And so when we have these two people that are both engaging in that dynamic, to me, that's just red flags on both sides. Like, we have two really troubled people here that, appear to be compatible in, like, the most destructive of ways.
Well, and it's interesting. You brought up the fact that Harry apparently already felt aggrieved before Meghan even came into the picture, and we've talked about this before. But the position of a second born in the royal household, it's definitely psychologically problematic, in that from the earliest age, you're always seeing that older sibling privileged over you. And of course, we know that there's sibling rivalry and lots of normal normal sibling relationships, but it is. And so the point being that Harry has said before in interviews that he doesn't feel like he exactly fits in or has a place, or he struggles to figure out his place. And so then, and then also he has a great deal of anger about the fact that his mother died, and seems to blame, not only to blame the media for that, but seems to have some sense, would you say, of anger at the royal family over that, or of their conflicted relationship with Diana. So anyway, I guess my point is, you have him with that perspective, and then you have someone like Meghan Markle enter into that, who, she, at least from what I've seen in the Oprah interview, she seems to have a kind of an aggrieved, alienated relationship to the world, and so, yeah, you get those two together, and it feeds off of it.
Well, they both seem to have, an enormous chip on their shoulders, and they've managed to create a narrative where, now they're the same, they can share the grievance. The thing about, the thing with Harry, that I think is kind of remarkable. I mean, you mentioned he's the second son. And so he never had the responsibility or, on the other side, the importance of William. William is always going to be king. Harry is constitutionally irrelevant. And so I'm sure that does have some impact on, a person's view of themselves growing up. But the thing that's interesting about the Windsors is that their second children seem to be the ones that are kind of the pampered ones, the ones that are indulged and covered up for and, spoiled and so forth. And that's the case whether you're talking about Harry, whether you're talking about Andrew, whether you're talking about Margaret, and it's a difficult thing to try to evaluate, okay, well, how much of these people's, difficulties and emotional problems that, play out eventually in the public sphere are because of that constitutional irrelevance and, maybe not being as important and so forth. But, how much of that can be attributed to, well, because we're so concerned that they, not feel inferior to, the older child, the one that's going to be responsible. We want to have a good family. Andrew was notoriously the Queen's favorite. And we sort of, have heard that about Harry as well, as far as the grandchildren, that he's the favorite grandchild. Well, that's not really that's not really
a marginalized position.
Yeah, that's maybe more of a situation where, you haven't really learned to regulate yourself because you haven't had to. You have been so privileged and so indulged that you sort of resent, when somebody tells you no. Andrew obviously, is a very prominent example of somebody who felt so entitled to do whatever he wanted, and is still, not really questioning or demonstrating any kind of remorse, for the choices that he made. I still am pretty sure he's not cooperating with the FBI, So I don't want to, we're not these people, and I don't want to pretend that I know Harry or could understand Harry or could have any idea of what it's like to be royal. But just the idea of him being somehow his self-esteem was damaged by being second, I just have a hard time buying that. It doesn't really seem consistent with the family history. It doesn't seem consistent with what we know about his history. I see a little bit more of the spoiled kid.
And of course, I can already hear people saying, well, you have to have sympathy and understand he lost his mom at a young age and it was traumatic and all of that. And that's absolutely true. But by the same token, the fact that he did lose his mom, it in some ways too, it can have a developmentally stunting effect on someone. I'm not saying that's automatic, but Diana, and a number of people don't like to hear me say this, but I've read biographies and there's a lot of stuff that's come out, especially since she's dead, that old friends have said on the record and stuff. She was a deeply troubled person in a lot of ways. I don't think that she was a malicious person, and I think that she had beautiful, amazing parts of her character and whatever. But as a mother, as a human being, and also as a mother, she was deeply complicated and problematic. And I'm not going to get into it, but there are things that you can read about. I'm not talking about physical abuse or anything like that, but there are some
Well,
things.
not with Harry.
What?
I said, well, probably not with Harry, but she pushed her stepmother down the stairs.
Oh, yes. No, I was thinking about with her children, but yes,
Yeah.
I mean, you broached that subject. I have read some things about physical abuse with other people. And so, but what I guess what I'm getting at is that from what I've read, like there were some big problems in the way that she raised her children and related to her children. And for a while, William wouldn't even speak to her when he was older because of some things. And so my point is that when a parent dies like that, she's sort of frozen in time for Harry, where maybe he has not had the opportunity. He so idolizes her now as this wonderful, perfect mother who was taken from him unjustly, which she was, but taken from him, that he may not have had the ability to process some things about his relationship to her. And it does seem like we've talked about this a little. It does seem like there seems to be a kind of a repetition compulsion going on with the fact that now he has his wife who seems to have big grievances. I would say a number of them, most of them imagined, but with the palace, with the royal family. And now basically she's drawn him into this kind of protective war against his family, alienated him from his family. And it does seem to be some kind of like Oedipal thing playing out where I'm protecting my wife. I couldn't protect my mom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that you mentioned when we talked about this before was, most of us as we grow up and mature, our relationship with our parents change, and you start to be able to have more of a sense of your parents as humans and complex people, and you just relate to them a little bit more on a person to person level than when you're a child and your parent is kind of godlike. And so for somebody like Harry, who had a mythical character like Diana, as a mother anyway, I mean, there's so much mythology around Diana. And he lost her at this young age. He never had the opportunity to grow up and have that mature relationship with her, where you have those types of conversations about, why did you push your stepmother down the stairs, kind of thing. And what's interesting, because Harry does definitely seem to buy into the myth of Diana. I mean, he's said
the binary. He seems to. I'm sorry to interrupt, but it seems like it's a very binary view of the world, where the royal family, especially some things that he said recently in interviews, the royal family is, and his father Charles, they're on the bad side in terms of this is unhealthy, this is toxic, whereas mother is this idealized, right?
Yeah, and so he never had the opportunity to mature into his perspective on Diana and Diana's parenting. And so what's interesting is that he did the Armchair Expert interview this week, and I did listen to that. And so he has talked about it in the context of sort of trying to talk about generational trauma, which to me is ironic to focus that on Charles and not Diana. But that's what he did. But so the fact that he is kind of starting to engage in this more adult analysis of his father and his relationship with his father and his father's parenting, but at the same time, it kind of seems like it doesn't seem like he's getting these insights because he's talking to Charles about it. You almost, at least I almost get the sense that like he watched The Crown and he's kind of getting his understanding of his dad's background from The Crown. Because, Charles's father just died, and Charles, they notoriously had a challenging relationship. They're different, very different personalities, very similar in lots of ways.
You're saying between Philip, who's dead
between
now,
Philip and Charles. Yeah, and so a lot of similarities in the kind of ways that like make you butt heads, you know, but also just a lot of difference in terms of you know, masculinity and emotions and that type of thing. But Charles, you know, he called Philip his dear papa. You know, Charles, whatever difficulties he may have had with his father, you know, they worked that out and they reconciled, and he grieved deeply when his father died. And it was like one of the most heartbreaking things, watching the funeral, and you know, Charles walking behind his father's coffin, and just, you know, he's in tears, and it's just devastating. Like I'm 7:30 in the morning, you know, bawling my eyes out watching this
Well,
funeral.
and it's worth noting too that even though of course there were huge issues in Charles' relationship with his parents, his upbringing or whatever, his upbringing was way more stable and healthy than what Diana had. Mm-hmm. And if we're going to be making observations about people being damaged by an unhealthy upbringing, then Diana's upbringing, and people can look into it themselves, but I think way more problematic. And you know, from a young age, she had demonstrated an issue with emotional dysregulation and paranoia, and you know, a lot of other things, and cutting and eating disorders and things when she got a little older. But I'm just saying that there are indications of deep unhealthiness there.
Yeah. Well, and you know, the thing that I find sort of ironic about this direction that Harry is going now is he hasn't gone full Republican, at least as far as I can tell. You know, he hasn't actually called, you know, for the Queen to be, you know,
right.
Whatever you do with the Queen, hopefully peacefully, you know, to depose her. He hasn't done anything like that. But he's clearly very critical of the royal system and resentful of being born into it. The fact that it is a system that is so archaic in the sense that you're born into it. But so to the extent that, you know, Charles suffered in his childhood, a significant part of that was because his mother was the Queen. She was a professional. She was the most important woman in England with the most important job. And now, Harry, you're going to mommy shame her? Really? That's what feminism is these days? Queen Elizabeth is one of the most remarkable women that has ever lived. She is really amazing in so many ways. I love that she's Elizabeth II, because then you always compare her to Elizabeth I, and they're like these two faces of femininity, right? Where, you know, Queen Elizabeth was the virgin queen, and, you know, she was honored through her power of, you know, forsaking the family life and men and romance ostensibly. Right. And you know, and just being the leader of England, and that was her life. And then Elizabeth II, you know, who has had the same dedication of her life to her country, but did that as a woman and as someone who loved very deeply and had a family, and, you know, cared obviously tremendously about her family, and always did things in a feminine way. You know, Elizabeth has never been aggressive. She's notoriously non-confrontational. You know, that was kind of one of the stories about, well, like there's always little stories that come out about the Queen. Like one of them is how, you know, she always has her purse. And so it came out like a couple years ago how one of the reasons she always has the purse is because she can switch it from hand to hand to send signals to her handlers to know, like, I'm done talking with this person, come save me now. Because she doesn't want to, you know, have to be rude or have to be assertive or anything like that. She wants to always be soft. and pliable in a lot of ways. So she's just this amazing woman. And, she took a leadership role at a time when, in 1948, I think was when she got married, and 51 or 52 or something like that. Early 50s was when she got on the throne. I mean, this is not really a time of great female empowerment, and so she's suddenly the most important woman in the world. And, they're rebuilding the world after the British Empire, is disintegrating in the post-World War era. And she's, trying to hold the Commonwealth together, and has this, critically important role. And so it just seems so cheap to me to then look at this amazing woman and be like, yeah, but she didn't spend enough time hugging her son. I mean, that's not what feminism is to me.
That's a really interesting perspective, and it's really interesting to the way you compared her to the previous Elizabeth I, and it's really, these are considered to be two of the greatest monarchs in the history of England, of Britain.
And I really see them as kind of the, maybe you can ask Greta what she thinks, but I see them as like the Artemis and Aphrodite archetypes. They're the two types of women: the one who's aloof and virginal and the huntress, and then the Aphrodite, who is much more of the seductress and the feminine. I think they're both amazing.
I think, and one thing that I want to make clear to our audience as well, is that we really, yes, we brought our opinions to the table prior to the Oprah interview, but honestly, I think you felt the same. I was really open to hearing what they had to say in the Oprah interview. And especially, they started off, more or less started off with a discussion of Meghan's suicide, her suicidal ideation and so forth. And, when someone tells me that they wanted to kill themselves, I'm going to take that at face value to an extent, and I'm going to have sympathy and everything. But what we have a problem with is that what we saw in that Oprah interview was, let's just be honest, it was a number of lies that they told. And we don't have to get into it now unless there's some that you want to point out, but people can do their own research. I know that Piers Morgan has gotten a lot of shit for being such an anti-Meghan fanatic, and I did feel like in the past year or two that he was unreasonable at times, but he was really good at identifying publicly. He came out in an article and ticked through all of the different lies that Meghan and Harry told in that interview, lies and misrepresentations. And that's what I find to be so astounding, is not that Harry chose to leave the UK or to leave his job with the royal family, and not even that he feels aggrieved about his status and maybe overly protective of Meghan or whatever, but that he sat down for this interview that many people were going to watch all over the world, and he said and allowed Meghan to say these lies. Do you have any thoughts on that interview and things that were said? Or
oh man, I mean, I was very interested in what they had to say in the interview.
What do you think they were trying to achieve? Maybe that's a better way of starting off.
Yeah. And so I can understand the thing that is so troubling to me about them is the inconsistency. And it isn't even just, the saying things that are obvious lies that can be debunked instantly, like the being married 3 days before you were married, or the George V, protocols. They, been what they have been since the 1920s. It's that there's just such a disconnect between their narrative and their, acting out in the world. And so,
what do you mean by that?
So an example of that really jumps to mind, is a very simple one. The titles. do you care about the titles or do you not care about the titles? I can't quite get it straight about, do the titles only matter because you think somebody wants you to not have it, and so you're like being contrary with, it's like a symbolic thing? Do you actually care about the title? The title has constitutional significance, that's the thing, that being a prince is Harry's birthright. Being a duke is not. And being a duke and, a duchess, having a title of nobility, that comes with, for example, eligibility to represent, in the House of Lords in England. So you're part of, you're part of the government system. I don't believe their particular title is landed, so comes with property or anything like that. But a lot of titles of nobility are. I just don't have a real clear understanding of why they use the title, if they hate the title, and what the title stands for. It's clear that the title, is beneficial to them for, probably marketing purposes, because for whatever reason, I guess people are more interested in the Duchess of Sussex than they are in Meghan Markle. But so that's one that's just so obviously, incongruous with what they're saying. If you don't care about the title, then don't use the title. Maybe give the title back, relinquish the title. And if not, then why not? What is it about the title that you do care about? And does that have anything to do with the history and traditions and significance of the title in Britain? Or is it because of how it benefits you and your situation?
Right. And that is that's one of the contradictions that we see in some of the things that they've said. I think too that, so one of the main complaints that they made, particularly Meghan, I believe, is that her voice was silenced. In fact, she went so far as to give this, what I thought was really this dumb allusion to, was it Mulan? The Disney movie. I can't remember if it was Mulan, but it was some hero.
The Little Mermaid.
The Little Mermaid. Thank you.
The Little Mermaid.
And so on the Oprah interview, one of the things that she talks about is was it the Oprah interview? Oh, I can cut some of this out. Was it the Oprah?
Yeah, interview? It was. It was when they were in the chicken coop, because she loves to rescue things.
That's right. And so she says that she was watching The Little Mermaid with Harry, and she was basically like inspired by it. She was like, oh, look, she lost her voice too, but then she got it back. And one of the things that Meghan kept complaining about in the interview is how in various ways the royal family tried to silence her, and she was told she couldn't speak and so forth. Well, first of all, I think that it would be nice if she would recognize that the only reason that anyone cares about what she says about anything is because of her connection with the royal family. I'm sure she was an okay actress on Suits. Okay, but that
I wouldn't know, because I had never even heard of it until she got
I hadn't either, but I'm trying not to be disparaging of her career or whatever. She's obviously done more in her career than I have so far, so I'll give that to her. But that was drawing to a close, and that was not going to be some big platform for her to make her political ideas known to the world and appreciated by the world. So the only reason that she would even have a voice would be that the royal family gave it to her. And so this idea that I'll take the notoriety that comes with joining the royal family, and then I will insist that this notoriety they've given me must be used in a highly politicized way, or I'm going to pout and act like I'm being silenced because I'm Black, basically. I mean, and then to throw the whole race thing in there too, I thought it was just really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just kind of tasteless. But she came on board wanting to modernize the monarchy, and I get it. I think a lot of them get it. Philip back in the day was, the one who got the credit for modernizing the monarchy. And I'm sure the monarchy is kind of like the law in many ways, where, modernizing it might mean, we're not 500 years behind anymore. We're only 100 years behind. But, it's just, hard for me to square the idea that she had a good faith interest in the monarchy and its benefit really at any point. I remember the wedding. I watched the wedding, got up early and watched it because that's what I do. And I remember her veil, was embroidered with symbols of all of the nations of the Commonwealth, and how she and Harry were made, Commonwealth youth ambassadors. And she was all, ready to go, to hit the ground running, I think was the word that she used, to fill this role in the royal family that was not thrust upon her, by the way. They didn't have to be working royals. That was an option that they have, that they chose to take. And so after having done that, the thing that she said in the Oprah interview very early on that if Oprah knew how to interview people, I think she would have followed up on. I certainly was like, follow up on this. That was a big thing.
I totally agree with
was
you
at the very beginning where Meghan was saying, you don't know what the day-to-day is like. You don't know what it's like on the day-to-day being the royal. And I really wanted Oprah to ask, what about being the day-to-day, of the royal are you talking about? Because it wasn't really clear at that point. The thing that I would like to have explored was I don't think she was talking about the press at that point, but you can't rule it out. I think she was literally talking about what it's like day to day to be a royal. And that's the thing that, if that is what she meant, that does not speak well for her good faith, going into this undertaking as a working royal, because it's boring. It's a terrible job in so many ways. They show up, at this nonprofit event and unveil the plaque and listen to the speech and give their own speech and get their picture taken and shake the hands, and then they change their outfit and go on to the next one and do it again. It's a lot of this sort of civic engagement, and
ceremonial, even very ceremonial, sounds like
very ceremonial, and so, not everything that you do as a royal is a passion project. It's like you have to pay your dues with all this boring stuff, because that's what gives you the platform to be able to do something, really big and cool and meaningful that you want to do. And so it seems like along the lines of what you were saying, that Meghan wanted to do the big important stuff and was not willing to do, she wasn't willing to put up with the boring stuff in order to have that opportunity. What a platform, what a platform. You're married to the sixth in line to the British throne. You have instantaneous appeal. You're instantaneously important. You have this whole system already set up to put you out there and help you organize things and talk to people and make a difference. And you couldn't, you couldn't unveil a few plaques, to be able to do that. It just, to me, speaks of somebody who doesn't really accept the necessity of trade-offs. She said it's not enough to survive, you have to thrive. And while that is some truth to that, nobody thrives every single second of every single day. If you do see your doctor, that's called mania.
Right.
Not
right.
really, it's just not reality. Everybody has to deal with downsides. So this expectation seemed to be that, she was going to be able to go out and be important and do important things. And unfortunately, for her, things that are not really within the purview of the royals because they're very political, which she seemed also unwilling to put aside.
Right. You could be like a royal, you really could be a commentator for the BBC. So that's, you know a lot.
I am such a nerd. Okay, I'm such a nerd. And I'll tell you exactly why. It's because US property law goes back to this old ancient British system, right? And so when you're a law school, when you're like a first year law student, you go into property law, and it's the first time I think that you really have this immersion in these weird ass words and ideas and things that you're like, what the fuck? And it's because it's from this British feudal system, back in the William Blackstone days. So things like, you got to learn about what's fee simple title. How's that different from fee tail title? Like what the hell are these things anyway? You don't know. You're not supposed to know. Don't go to law school. You'll be forced to know. But so there's this, obviously like deep common law root in the United States. That's always been one of the things that I found really interesting about just the legacy of who we are. And obviously we broke away from Britain, but so many of these things that we held on to. And so I've always been really interested in, okay, that diverged 250 years ago. And now, where are we now? How is that gone? One of the things that I think is really fascinating about just the royal family and the constitutional system, because I don't, Americans, we don't have a monarchy. We don't really think about it. And so for us, abolish a monarchy, doesn't seem like really that big of a deal. It's just, one form of government over another. If Britain were to abolish their monarchy, then they just have some elected president or something like that. And that would be that. And it's so much more complicated than that because of the crown estate. And there's a whole legacy of wealth and ownership that is tied in with the British royal family, because they are, a line of succession of property since 1033. I mean, William the Conqueror started, Windsor, basically. So there's this enormous, inherited wealth that's part of what it means to have a royal family. If you follow any economic stuff, and Thomas Piketty was a guy who a few years ago wrote this big article about capital and how capital grows at a greater rate basically than income does, and that's like a universal kind of rule. And so if you think about the capital of the British family, since 1033, it's accrued for over 1,000 years. I mean, they're enormously wealthy, compared to the rest of the country. And so that's a big issue that you have to kind of sort out, because it's tied in your basic property rights. They have rights to this stuff. If you depose the Queen, does she get to take Buckingham Palace? And if not, why not? There's things people don't know about the finances of the British royal family. Like there's a lot of the taxpayers support them because there's this thing called the sovereign grant, right? So the royal family gets the sovereign grant that is to fund the duties of the royal family as the head of state. And so then she distributes the sovereign grant among the working royals. And that's what, supports all the overseas trips and the different programs and things that they do. So, but the sovereign grant is not, yes, it comes from the taxpayer, but what people don't know is that the sovereign grant is a percentage of the revenues of the crown estate. So all of the property that is owned by the crown, generates all of this revenue, and the queen is entitled by law under property law. She's entitled to all of that. And what has happened is that going back to George III, every monarch in Britain has said, I will disclaim that to Parliament. Parliament can take all of that, and in exchange, just give me this small portion back for me to be able to, run these basic functions. If you get rid of the queen, what happens to the income of the crown estate? She's probably not going to be handing that over to the British government anymore. So it's fascinating to me, because these are the kinds of things that, go back to Charles I when they fixed it by cutting the king's head off, and that might be the only way that these types of problems get solved, unfortunately. But it's just so complicated.
That's interesting. And I've found, not that I claim to be an absolute expert on these things or even on the royal family, but I've read a fair amount, not as much as you have maybe, but read a fair amount. But it's interesting how many assumptions people make about the royal family and what they're like, or their history, or the legalities of things. And the actual picture, the reality is much more complicated. Something that, to kind of transition back into the Depp thing, I'm not sure I'll edit this or not, but something that's interesting to me is how the media is depicting the situation between Harry and Meghan and the royal family as a case of the downtrodden versus the privileged. And in this scenario, somehow Meghan and Harry, who are, wildly blessed financially and in terms of fame and connections and all these other things, they somehow are being depicted as these poor, oppressed, downtrodden people. And you've got the royal family. And one of the things that, it kind of reminds me of is the assumption that was made early on when Amber Heard, going back to the Depp Heard case, when Amber Heard came out with her claims against Depp, is that because Depp was the bigger movie star and because he was a man, then we automatically had to view Amber Heard as the sympathetic character, and she depicted herself, in speeches and interviews as being up against this giant machine that was Johnny Depp, and his enablers and everything. And you mentioned this in our last conversation about this sort of inability for the media, for lots of people, to empathize with someone who's seen as being in a privileged position.
Yeah, and that's something that actually Harry even said in the Armchair Expert interview, that I was like, wow, that's maybe the most insightful thing I've ever heard come out of Harry's mouth. And it's this idea that, people who have privilege are not allowed to suffer in this day and age. It's like there's just this kind of attitude that if you have privilege, then you just need to be grateful and, do your work, whatever you need to do to not be an oppressor or whatever. And your pain is kind of insignificant compared to the pain of, all of the downtrodden.
Interesting. Wow. Well, I really appreciate you being with us here again and sitting for this conversation. And I know that my audience, my viewers, are going to be really interested in a lot of things that we've talked about here. And so we'll definitely have you back again for more updates, the Johnny Depp Amber Heard situation, as we inch closer to that that trial.
It's coming.
Oh man, and maybe more stuff too. All right, and as always, to my audience members, always appreciate your support on PayPal or Patreon or Bitcoin or Dogecoin. No, we don't do Doge here. Anyway, so yeah, everybody have a good day. Thank you.